Attack July 11, 1943. 2:47 in the afternoon. A jeep kicks up dust on a Sicilian road racing toward the front lines. Inside sits Lieutenant General George S. Patton, commander of the 7th Army, his ivory-handled pistols gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. He's furious. The Ponte Olivo airfield, a critical objective just 8 miles inland from the invasion beaches, still flies the Nazi swastika. It was supposed to fall on D-Day. It's now D+1 and American troops are pinned down. Patton storms into the command post of the 1st Infantry Division. Major General Terry Allen, division commander, stands his ground. "We'll take it tonight, sir," Allen promises. "Come hell or high water." Patton nods satisfied and roars off. But there's a problem. A big one. Allen's direct superior, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commander of the TEU Corps, had explicitly ordered Allen to halt his advance until a pocket of German resistance was eliminated. Patton's order directly contradicted Bradley's, violating the sacred chain of command. Worse, Patton hadn't even bothered to inform Bradley about it. Within hours, Bradley would find out. The confrontation that followed would define the most volatile relationship in the American military, pit two opposite philosophies of war against each other, and set the stage for one of the most controversial decisions of World War II. When Bradley finally cornered Patton about the airfield incident, he didn't mince words. He considered Patton's move reckless, dangerous, and insubordinate. But what Patton did next would prove whether audacity wins wars or gets men killed. To understand this moment, you need to know 3 things. First, Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, had kicked off just 36 hours earlier on July 10, 1943. It was the first time American forces would land on European soil since World War I, and the pressure was immense. 160,000 Allied troops hit the beaches in what was then the largest amphibious operation in history. The goal was simple but brutal: capture Sicily, knock Italy out of the war, and open a path to Hitler's Europe. Second, you need to understand George Patton and Omar Bradley. They weren't enemies, not exactly, but they might as well have been from different planets. Patton was a cavalry officer, a man who believed in shock, speed, and relentless attack. He thought wars were won by making the other guy bleed, not by carefully preserving your own forces. Bradley was an infantryman, a teacher, a methodical planner who believed in minimizing casualties and securing flanks before pushing forward. Patton saw war as an art. Bradley saw it as a science. Both men were brilliant, both would rise to command armies, and both thought the other was fundamentally wrong about how to fight. Third, the stakes at Ponte Olivo weren't just tactical, they were existential. Airfields meant air superiority. Air superiority meant survival. Without that airfield, American troops on the beaches were sitting ducks for Luftwaffe bombers. German panzer divisions were already counter-attacking, trying to drive the invasion force back into the sea. Every hour that airfield stayed in enemy hands, more Americans died. Patton knew it. Bradley knew it. But they disagreed violently about how fast to move and what risks to take. Now, with that in mind, let's return to that dusty command post on July 11th, where Patton had just bypassed Bradley's authority and ordered an immediate night attack. The airfield would fall that night, just as Patton predicted, but the price wouldn't be paid in blood. It would be paid in trust, in command relationships, and in a pattern that would repeat itself again and again as these two men fought their way across Europe. George Smith Patton Jr. was born to fight, literally. His family tree included Confederate colonels, Revolutionary War officers, and enough military tradition to fill a library. He graduated from West Point in 1909, designed the U.S. Army's cavalry saber, competed in the 1912 Olympics in the modern pentathlon, and earned his first combat experience chasing Pancho Villa through Mexico with then-Lieutenant Dwight Eisenhower. By July 1943, at age 57, Patton had already proven himself in North Africa, rescuing a defeated American force at Kasserine Pass and turning them into winners. But here's the thing about Patton. He was as self-destructive as he was brilliant. He had a volcanic temper, a mouth that sprayed profanity like a machine gun, and an ego the size of a panzer division. He believed he was the reincarnation of ancient warriors, could quote classical literature from memory, and wrote poetry in his spare time. His soldiers called him Old Blood and Guts, though some added, Yeah, our blood, his guts. But they followed him. Why? Because Patton won. He moved fast, hit hard, and when everyone else was planning, he was already attacking. His Third Army would eventually capture more ground and kill more Germans than any other Allied force in Europe. But in July 1943, that future glory was anything but certain. The slapping incidents in Sicily, where Patton physically assaulted 2 soldiers suffering from combat fatigue, would nearly end his career. Only the intervention of General George Marshall kept him from being sent home in disgrace. Omar Bradley couldn't have been more different. Born in rural Missouri in 1893, he was the son of a schoolteacher and grew up without wealth or privilege. He graduated from West Point the same year as Eisenhower, 1915, and spent the next 28 years teaching, studying, and slowly climbing the ranks without ever hearing a shot fired in anger. While Patton was charging around Mexico and France in World War I, Bradley was stateside training troops. He didn't see combat until he was 50 years old. But what Bradley lacked in combat experience, he made up for in something else: the complete trust of his superiors. Eisenhower called Bradley the best rounded combat leader he had. General Marshall thought Bradley was the embodiment of what an American general should be: calm, thoughtful, concerned about his men, and completely devoid of personal ambition. Soldiers loved him because he didn't waste their lives. Correspondents called him the GI's general. He wore a standard-issue uniform, carried a carbine instead of ivory pistols, and spoke in a quiet Midwest drawl that sounded nothing like Patton's patrician bark. Where Patton sought glory, Bradley sought victory. Where Patton embraced risk, Bradley calculated cost. And in July 1943, Bradley was Patton's immediate subordinate as commander of the II Corps, part of Patton's 7th Army. But that wouldn't last. Bradley's star was rising. Patton's was about to fall. These 2 men, brilliant in opposite ways, were now locked in a partnership neither wanted. Patton needed Bradley's competence to execute his wild plans. Bradley needed Patton's audacity to win battles that careful planning alone could never achieve. But trust? That was eroding fast, and the Ponte Olivo incident was just the beginning. What neither man knew yet was that their relationship would define American strategy for the rest of the war, culminating in the most controversial decision of the entire European campaign. The moment at Falaise when Bradley would order Patton to stop an attack that could have ended the war 6 months early. The Sicily invasion had started well, then turned into a nightmare. The airborne drop that was supposed to soften German defenses scattered 3,400 paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne across 60 miles of coastline. Most units were lost. Some landed in the ocean and drowned. Others landed in enemy positions and were killed before they could organize. Of the 226 C-47 transport planes, 23 were shot down by friendly fire when Navy gunners mistook them for German bombers. The beach landings fared better, but barely. At Gila, where Patton came ashore, German and Italian forces counterattacked with tanks within hours. The Hermann Göring Panzer Division, one of the Wehrmacht's elite units, nearly drove the Americans back into the sea. Patton himself grabbed a naval bombardment radio and directed fire from USS Boise onto advancing German tanks, stopping them just 1,000 yards from the beach. It was the kind of heroic, improvisational leadership that made Patton a legend. But it also revealed how close the invasion came to disaster. By the morning of July 11th, American forces controlled a beachhead about 10 miles deep and 40 miles wide. That was it. The plan called for rapid inland advances to capture airfields, cut German supply lines, and link up with British forces pushing north from Syracuse. None of that was happening. German resistance was stiffening. Italian coastal units were surrendering by the thousands, clogging roads and slowing advances. And critically, 3 airfields, including Ponte Olivo, remained in enemy hands. This is where Bradley's caution clashed with Patton's aggression. Bradley had ordered the 1st Infantry Division to consolidate its position and eliminate a pocket of German resistance near the coast before pushing inland toward Ponte Olivo. It was sound doctrine. Don't leave enemy forces in your rear, secure your flanks, establish supply lines, then advance methodically. But Patton saw it differently. Every hour those airfields stayed in German hands meant more American casualties from air attacks. The Luftwaffe was pounding the invasion fleet. Liberty ships were being sunk. Supplies weren't getting ashore. Speed, Patton believed, would save lives. Delay would kill them. So when Patton visited Terry Allen's headquarters on the afternoon of July 11th and learned that Ponte Olivo still wasn't captured, he made a command decision. He ordered Allen to attack immediately that night, regardless of Bradley's instructions. Allen didn't hesitate. "We'll take it tonight, sir, come hell or high water." And they did. At midnight, Allen launched a coordinated assault supported by artillery and naval gunfire. The Germans, preparing their own dawn attack, were caught completely by surprise. By morning, the 1st Infantry Division had rolled up German lines and captured Ponte Olivo airfield. It was exactly the kind of victory Patton believed in: aggressive, unexpected, decisive. American engineers had the runway operational within hours. Fighter planes landed, providing air cover for the beachhead. The tide was turning. But when Bradley learned what had happened, he was livid. For Bradley, this wasn't just about tactics, it was about command integrity. He had given Allen a direct order based on sound military judgment: eliminate the German pocket, then advance. Patton had countermanded that order without consultation, without coordination, without even notifying Bradley. What if the Germans had been stronger? What if Allen's division had been caught between two enemy forces? The left flank was exposed. Supply lines were vulnerable. Patton had gambled with men's lives based on nothing more than his gut instinct. Yes, it had worked this time, but what about next time? What happened when Patton's recklessness met a competent enemy defense? This wasn't cavalry warfare. This was modern, industrialized combat, where mistakes got thousands of people killed. Bradley confronted Patton as soon as he could. The exchange was tense, professional, and furious. Patton apologized, playing the contrite subordinate, but Bradley wasn't fooled. He knew Patton would do it again the moment he thought it necessary. Later, Bradley would write that he still considered Patton's move reckless. Those words, restrained as they were, captured the fundamental divide between these men. Bradley saw recklessness. Patton saw necessity. Bradley valued order and lives. Patton valued momentum and results. And in the summer of 1943, with the war hanging in the balance, no one could say for certain which philosophy was right. The pattern established at Ponte Olivo would repeat itself across Sicily, across France, and finally, catastrophically, at a place called Falaise. But before we get there, we need to understand what happened in the weeks after that July confrontation. Patton and Bradley pushed their forces across Sicily in what became a race to Messina, the island's northeastern port. Montgomery's British 8th Army was supposed to capture it, advancing up the eastern coast through Catania. But Montgomery got bogged down against German defenses. So Patton, seeing an opportunity for glory and eager to beat Montgomery to the prize, shifted his entire army westward, then raced along the northern coast road toward Messina. Bradley thought it was a waste of effort, a vanity project that ignored the real objective: destroying German forces, not capturing territory. But Patton couldn't help himself. On August 17, 1943, American troops entered Messina hours before the British. Patton was ecstatic. Montgomery was furious. Eisenhower was quietly pleased, and Bradley filed the incident away in his memory as more evidence that Patton cared more about headlines than strategy. Then came the slapping incidents. On August 3rd and again on August 10th, Patton visited field hospitals and encountered soldiers suffering from what we now call PTSD, but was then dismissed as battle fatigue or cowardice. Patton, who believed such men were malingering, slapped them, called them cowards, and ordered them back to the front. When the story leaked to the press, public outrage nearly ended Patton's career. Congress demanded his dismissal. Eisenhower seriously considered it. But General Marshall intervened, arguing that Patton's tactical genius was too valuable to waste. The compromise: Patton would remain in the European theater, but be sidelined for D-Day. Instead of commanding the invasion of Normandy, he would sit in England commanding a phantom army, part of an elaborate deception to convince Hitler the invasion would come at Calais. It was a humiliating demotion for a man who saw himself as America's greatest warrior. Meanwhile, Omar Bradley's star continued to rise. In June 1944, Bradley commanded 1st Army at Normandy. By August, he was commanding 12th Army Group, making him Patton's boss. The relationship inverted. The reckless genius was now subordinate to the careful planner. And on August 13, 1944, that relationship would be tested in the most consequential way imaginable. After the breakout from Normandy, Allied forces had German Army Group B trapped in a pocket near the French towns of Falaise and Argentan. It was a chance to destroy 2 entire German armies, possibly 19 divisions, and end the war in Europe months early. Patton's 15th Corps, racing north, reached Argentan on August 12th. The Canadians attacking south were supposed to reach Falaise, about 20 miles to the north. If they could link up, they'd seal the pocket completely. The Germans would be finished. Patton saw the opportunity immediately. On the morning of August 13th, he ordered General Wade Heislip's 15th Corps to push beyond Argentan toward Falaise, even though that meant crossing into British-Canadian operational boundaries set by Field Marshal Montgomery. Patton knew it was aggressive. He knew it violated protocol. He didn't care. This was the chance to end the war. But Bradley said no. At 11:20 that morning, Bradley called his headquarters and gave a direct order: halt at Argentan. Do not cross the boundary line under any circumstances. The decision would haunt Bradley for the rest of his life. Why did Bradley stop Patton? The official reasons made tactical sense. First, 15th Corps' left flank was already exposed to German counterattack. Pushing farther north would stretch the line dangerously thin. Second, the Canadians were about to launch another attack toward Falaise, and Bradley expected them to close the gap from the north. Having American and Canadian forces converge in the middle of a battle risked friendly fire casualties. Third, Montgomery controlled that sector, and crossing into his zone without permission would create a command nightmare. These were reasonable concerns, but there were other factors Bradley didn't mention publicly. He feared Patton couldn't hold Falaise if he reached it. He worried about Patton's exposed flanks, and perhaps most importantly, he knew Patton's reputation for recklessness. What if this was another Ponte Olivo, but this time it went wrong? Patton exploded. He called Bradley. He called Eisenhower. He argued that letting the Germans escape would prolong the war. He was right. Over the next week, while Canadian forces finally captured Falaise and American forces waited at Argentan, somewhere between 20,000 and 40,000 German soldiers escaped through the gap. Those troops would regroup, rearm and fight again in the Battle of the Bulge, costing thousands of American lives. The Falaise Gap became one of the great controversies of World War II. Historians still debate whether Bradley made the right call. Some argue he was prudent, that closing the gap with an overextended corps would have been suicidal. Others argue he let the opportunity of the war slip through his fingers because he didn't trust Patton's aggressive instincts. Patton never forgave Bradley for the decision. In his diary, he would later write that Bradley lacked the boldness to seize decisive victory when it was offered. Bradley, for his part, stood by his decision but admitted it troubled him. Years after the war, he would wonder aloud whether he should have let Patton go. The answer to that question cuts to the heart of military strategy itself. When do you accept risk? When do you play it safe? At what point does caution become cowardice and audacity become recklessness? In August 1944, Bradley chose caution. He remembered Ponte Olivo. He remembered Patton's pattern of insubordination. He remembered the word he'd used after that first confrontation in Sicily: reckless. And he decided that this time, recklessness would not be rewarded. 4 months later, Germany launched its last great offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge. On December 16, 1944, 3 German armies smashed through thinly defended American lines in the Ardennes forest, creating a bulge 50 miles deep and 60 miles wide in Allied lines. 8 American divisions were shattered. Thousands of troops were surrounded, including the 101st Airborne at Bastogne. It was the largest battle the U.S. Army would fight in the entire war, and for a few terrifying days, it looked like the Germans might actually win. Supreme Allied headquarters was in crisis mode. Eisenhower called an emergency conference at Verdun on December 19th. Bradley, Patton, and other senior commanders gathered in a cold, gloomy room lit by a single wood-burning stove. Eisenhower opened the meeting by trying to maintain optimism, saying this was an opportunity, not a disaster. Patton cut through the bullshit immediately. Hell, let's have the guts to let the sons of bitches go all the way to Paris. Then we'll really cut them off and chew them up. It was vintage Patton. Audacious, slightly insane, and strategically sound. But Eisenhower needed something more practical. He needed Patton to attack north, into the German flank to relieve Bastogne and cut off the German penetration. Bradley was skeptical. Patton's Third Army was 100 miles south of the Bulge, heavily engaged in its own offensive toward the Saar River. To disengage 3 divisions, turn them 90 degrees, move them over icy winter roads in the middle of the worst weather in decades, and launch a coordinated attack. Well, it seemed impossible. Then Patton said the words that would define his legacy. I can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours. I'll have more as soon as they can get there. The room went silent. Even for Patton, this seemed like madness. Moving 3 divisions, that's 60,000 men with their tanks, artillery, trucks, and supplies, required thousands of vehicles traveling on a handful of roads through winter conditions. The logistics alone should have taken a week. Attacking in 2 days was fantasy. But Patton wasn't bluffing. He'd already anticipated this moment. In one of his rare acts of caution, Patton had war-gamed exactly this scenario days earlier. His staff had prepared 3 contingency plans for moving north. All he needed was Eisenhower's permission to execute. Eisenhower gave it. At 11:20 a.m. on December 19th, Patton called his Chief of Staff, Major General Hobart Gay, using a code word they'd arranged, nickel. That single word set in motion one of the great feats of military logistics in modern history. The 4th Armored Division, the 26th Infantry Division, and the 80th Infantry Division stopped their attacks, turned north, and began moving toward Bastogne. Supply units redirected thousands of tons of ammunition, fuel, and food. Engineers cleared roads and built bridges. And on December 22nd, exactly 48 hours after Patton's promise, the first elements of 3 Corps attacked north into the German flank. It wasn't pretty. The weather was atrocious, with temperatures below freezing and snow limiting visibility. German resistance was fierce. The 4th Armored Division, spearheading the advance, lost tanks to minefields, ambushes, and Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons, but Patton kept pushing. He relieved commanders who hesitated. He personally visited forward positions, often under fire, demanding speed and aggression. On December 26th, elements of the 4th Armored Division broke through German lines and linked up with the surrounded 101st Airborne in Bastogne. The relief corridor was narrow, barely a road wide, but it was enough. Supplies began flowing. Wounded were evacuated. The siege was broken. Patton didn't stop there. While other commanders might have consolidated, Patton kept attacking. He wanted to cut off the entire German penetration, not just relieve one surrounded town. Through January, 3rd Army ground forward, fighting in brutal winter conditions, recapturing lost ground, and pushing the Germans back to their start lines. By January 16, 1945, the Bulge was closed. The German offensive, Hitler's last gamble, had failed, but the cost was staggering. 19,000 Americans killed, 47,500 wounded, 23,000 missing or captured. It was the bloodiest battle in American history. And Patton's relief of Bastogne, his 90-degree pivot of 3 divisions in 48 hours, became the stuff of legend. Even Bradley, who had questioned every other Patton move, had to admit it was a masterpiece of battlefield command. Eisenhower called it Patton's finest hour. Montgomery, who despised Patton, privately conceded that no other Allied commander could have done it. German commanders, reading after-action reports, were baffled. How had Patton moved so fast? The answer was simple. He'd planned for it. And when the moment came, he didn't hesitate. The immediate result was vindication for Patton's entire philosophy of war. The relief of Bastogne proved that speed, aggression, and calculated risk-taking could achieve results that methodical planning never would. It also proved that Patton's recklessness wasn't reckless at all when it was backed by preparation, logistics, and tactical genius. Bradley, who had spent 2 years questioning Patton's judgment, had to acknowledge that in this case, Patton had been absolutely right. Eisenhower went further, recommending Patton for his 4th star. When the promotion came through in April 1945, weeks before the war in Europe ended, it was recognition that Patton's methods, however controversial, had saved the campaign. But the consequences ran deeper than personal vindication. The Battle of the Bulge exposed the cost of the Falaise Gap decision 4 months earlier. Many of the German divisions that attacked in the Ardennes were units that had escaped from Falaise. If Bradley had let Patton close the gap in August, those divisions might have been destroyed. The Bulge might never have happened, and 19,000 American lives might have been saved. That's speculation, of course. We can't know what would have happened, but the question haunted Bradley for the rest of his life. In his memoirs published years after the war, Bradley defended the Falaise decision, but admitted it troubled him. He understood what historians would say, that his caution at Falaise prolonged the war. Patton and Bradley's relationship never fully recovered. They worked together professionally for the rest of the war, but the trust was gone. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Patton wanted to keep going, to push into Czechoslovakia and beat the Soviets to Prague, to confront the emerging threat from the east. Bradley and Eisenhower said no. Political considerations, agreements with Stalin, the broader strategy, all of it overruled Patton's instincts. And maybe they were right. Maybe Patton's desire to keep fighting was just his ego, his need for glory, his inability to accept that the war was over. Or maybe Patton saw what was coming, the Cold War, the Iron Curtain, decades of conflict that could have been prevented if America had taken a harder line in 1945. Patton never got to find out. On December 9, 1945, his staff car collided with a truck near Mannheim, Germany. Patton's neck was broken. He died 12 days later on December 21st, without ever regaining the ability to walk. He was 60 years old. Bradley lived another 36 years, dying in 1981 at age 88. In that time, he served as Chief of Staff of the Army and the first chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He wrote his memoirs, defended his decisions, and watched as Patton's legend grew while his own accomplishments were quietly forgotten. The partnership that neither man wanted, the relationship defined by one word, reckless, had shaped the entire course of the European war. And the question it posed remains unanswered. In war, is it better to be cautious and preserve what you have, or audacious and risk everything for decisive victory? Here's what's remarkable about the Patton-Bradley relationship. Both men were right. Bradley was right to be concerned about Patton's recklessness, about his insubordination, about the risks he took with men's lives. Ponte Olivo could have been a disaster. The race to Messina was a vanity project, and pushing to Falaise with exposed flanks might have resulted in a bloody defeat. Bradley's caution saved lives and maintained command discipline, but Patton was also right. Wars aren't won by being careful. They're won by seizing opportunities when they appear, even if those opportunities come with risk. Ponte Olivo's capture changed the course of the Sicily campaign. Bastogna's relief saved thousands of American soldiers and proved that speed could overcome superior force. The tragedy is that the Allies needed both men. They needed Bradley's steady competence to plan and organize, and they needed Patton's ruthless aggression to execute and exploit. When they worked together, when Bradley channeled Patton's instincts without stifling them, the result was unstoppable. But when Bradley's caution overruled Patton's audacity, as at Falaise, opportunities were lost. And when Patton's ego overruled Bradley's judgment, as in the race to Messina, resources were wasted. The lesson isn't that one approach is better than the other. It's that great organizations need both, the planner and the warrior, the brake and the accelerator, the cautious voice that says wait, and the bold voice that says now. So when Bradley called Patton reckless after the Ponte Olivo incident, he was speaking a truth. Patton was reckless, but recklessness properly applied can win wars. The question isn't whether to take risks, it's when to take them, how big they should be, and who decides. In July 1943, Patton decided. He took the risk. He captured the airfield, and he proved that sometimes in the chaos and fog of war, audacity is the most rational choice of all. That doesn't mean Bradley was wrong to question it. It means the tension between them, the constant push and pull between caution and aggression, was exactly what the Allied war effort needed. You don't want a general who never takes risks. But you don't want one who takes them all either. You want both. And in World War II, America got both. The relationship between Patton and Bradley reveals something fundamental about leadership, strategy, and human nature itself. These two brilliant, contradictory men fought their way across Europe disagreeing about almost everything. Yet together, they helped win the greatest conflict in history. If you found this story fascinating, you might want to explore more about the decisions that shaped World War II. And if you're interested in how military leaders balance risk and caution in modern warfare, that's a topic worth its own deep dive. If you enjoyed this journey through one of World War II's most complex relationships, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We tell history the way it actually happened, messy, human, and full of impossible choices. Share this video with someone who loves military history or leadership lessons, and let us know in the comments, who do you think was right, Patton or Bradley? Audacity or caution? The soldier's life or the war's duration? These questions don't have easy answers, which is exactly why they matter.